The day Emily and I broke up, we wished each other a lifetime of loneliness with the most spiteful words. Later, after graduating, she went south and I went north. Swore to never see each other again. 7 years later, I returned home for a blind date. In a restaurant, I unexpectedly ran into a little boy who looked somewhat like Emily. He clung to my leg, staring at me for a long time. I crouched down and asked with a smile who he belonged to. That's when a familiar voice came from behind. "He's my son." I was stunned for a moment, then turned to see Emily standing at the door. She was in a black coat, her dark hair slightly covering her eyes. More composed than 5 years ago. The person I was on the blind date with asked, "Do you two know each other?" I nodded, "Yeah, we do. Her name's Emily, my first love. In college, she was the campus beauty sitting next to me. She'd quietly follow me home after school and offer me her umbrella on rainy days, running home in the rain herself. When I was almost caught for skipping class to attend a concert, she handed me candy at the student council office. Every time she won a basketball game, her eyes would search for me in the stands amidst the cheers. We kissed in the woods, went to concerts together, spurred impromptu trips to the grasslands to watch the stars. When she was 20, she shouted from the 56th floor, "Emily will always love Evan. How can you forget such a passionate young love?" After we broke up, I imagined many scenarios of meeting her again. Not once did I expect this. Standing before me, the little boy wore a white polo shirt and sweatpants, his face resembling Emily's, especially his tightly pressed lips. Through him, I saw a glimpse of young Emily. I've forgotten why we even broke up. I just remember on that day, we cursed each other to end up alone forever, then stormed off to our respective rooms. I sobbed behind the door for ages, and the next morning, packed up to move back to my dorm. 3 months later, on graduation day, a junior eagerly asked her for a photo. She glanced at me. I turned, avoiding her gaze. A roommate pitted, asking, "You two are really done? Isn't it such a waste? I heard Emily's company's moving south. You probably won't see her again." It hurt like hell, yet I packed for the north, determined to never cross paths again. Oddly, I felt thankful for the blind date today, as Mom insisted I dress up. So here I was in a trench coat, hair neatly done. At least I didn't look a mess. After all, romantic reunions usually involve seeing each other barefaced. But I'm not the main character. Long time no see. Her voice was calm, though her fingers clenched subconsciously. I shoved aside the lingering bitterness, smiled at her. Long time no see. She glanced at my date, a politely smiling person with glasses. A pointed eyebrow raise. "On a blind date?" I nodded. She laughed self-deprecatingly, took the boy's hand. "Then we won't bother you." The boy clung tightly to my leg, making it hard for Emily to reach him. He finally let go, watching me with big, pleading eyes. The kid hadn't said a word since approaching me, but he'd nudge my bowl when someone served me food. My date awkwardly asked why. He stayed silent, with a hint of Emily's stubbornness. I tried to ease things, saying, "This boy looks a lot like you." Emily lifted her eyes directly at me, but his eyes resemble his mom's more. Felt like a knife to the heart. I avoided her gaze. She must be truly happy now. Seems like I was the lonely one all along. I fell silent, nodding at the boy before returning to my seat. My date, sensing it, kindly placed more food on my plate. "You haven't eaten much yet." Emily chuckled lightly beside me. When leaving, she called, "Come on, Ken, let's go. Let's not disturb Uncle's date." My hands stiffened slightly. That summer night back then, after a date with Emily, passing by a family of 3, she said, "Evan, let's name our child Ken someday." After Emily left, the date asked about her a bit more. Initially, I didn't want to say much, but when pressed, I said, "She's my ex." My date awkwardly laughed. "She's got a child now, huh? No worries though, once we get hitched, we can have kids right away. Your mom said you've been all on your own. I feel for you. Stay here, I'm a teacher, stable salary, enough for us." I listened to her chatter, took a sip of water, and made an excuse to leave. Before going, she glanced at the bill, awkwardly laughed. How about we split it? Not that I'm stingy, just, we aren't official yet, right? The young server looked at me in amazement, disdainful of my date's suggestion. I smiled, taking the bill from her. No need, I'll cover it. A couple $100 isn't much, and I preferred not adding her on something like WeChat for continued contact. If not for Mom tripping and hurting her leg on the stairs, causing me to resign due to a boss's harassment, I'd have never come back or agreed to her blind date demands. Back home, Mom enthusiastically asked how it went. Changing into loungewear, I helplessly faced her on crutches. Not happening. Mom, stop pressuring me. Mom grumbled. Who's pressuring you? You're 27 already, still single and living alone in the capital. I can't help but worry about you. Everyone in our family's educated and you're a math teacher. We've got a house and a car. Plenty would love to marry her. You're picky about who you like. So who do you actually like? I heard the nagging from outside the room. Emily's face flashed in my mind. Then I chuckled at myself. Evan, what are you thinking? You guys broke up ages ago, and she's married now with kids. Time to catch some sleep. Life back home is slower paced. The doctor said my mom's leg just needs a month of rest at home. I figured I'd treat it like a little vacation. To make up for all the sleep I've missed, I just ate and slept for 2 days straight. Early Monday, my mom couldn't take it anymore and yanked open the curtains to wake me up. You can't just sleep all the time. Your dad said you slept for 20 hours straight on the couch yesterday. He thought you died. This Monday, and I've arranged with the principal for you to substitute teach for me for a month. Get up, change, and head to school now. I wanted to protest, but Aunt Lou from school had already called me. Evan, you're a top graduate and your mom's the class teacher. With her on leave for a month, I really can't find someone to fill in. This aunt's the school principal and an old friend of my mom's. She doesn't have kids and used to buy me clothes and shoes as a kid. Feeling a bit guilty, I had no choice but to agree. Standing at the podium, all the little kids stared wide-eyed, covering their mouths. They're adorably deadly. I didn't expect to see that little boy in the front row. I glanced at the delicate handwriting in his notebook. Ken. It's a nice name. After the class ended, compared to others who occasionally whispered, Ken was especially quiet. I was curious why this child never spoke, so I asked him to answer a simple question. He stood up, looked at me, and still said nothing. I was puzzled. The bell rang for break time. Kids gathered around me. Evan, you're so handsome. Evan, will I grow up to be like you? Evan, will you stay here forever? I smiled and answered each one. After work, I asked my mom about Ken. My mom sighed. That kid has autism. You need to take care of him. I nodded. From then on, I often guided Ken to speak after class. His condition seemed to improve. He started answering questions during class, though softly. But it was a start. Half a month later, a ponytailed little boy rushed into my office, shouting, Evan, Ken and John got into a fight. When I got there, both kids were messy. John was pinned under Ken with a bruise on his face. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly separated them. After treating their wounds at the infirmary, I brought them to the office, but no matter how I asked, neither kid would say why they fought. I had to call their parents. John's parents were furious and said they'd come over immediately. But when I saw Emily's number in Ken's parents' contact info, the mother's slot was blank. I had no choice but to call her. She seemed to be in a meeting. Her voice stopped abruptly after a second. Looking at Ken with his scratched face, I took a deep breath and spoke. Is this Ken's mom? I'm Evan, Ken's substitute teacher. There was a conflict at school. If possible, could you come over? After I spoke, there was silence on the other end. After a long pause, she said, okay. Emily arrived by the time John's parents were there. Seeing John's injuries, they got furious and yelled at Ken. I frowned and stopped them. John's mom, I understand you're upset, but we don't know the full story. Issues between kids need adults to mediate. If there's an issue, you can talk to his dad. John's mom looked at me and backed off. I kneeled and quietly asked John why he and Ken fought. He avoided my gaze guiltily. Frustrated, I asked Ken again. He looked at me, lips tight. He said, I don't have a dad. Emily walked up just in time to hear that, her eyes hinting at displeasure. John's mom quickly smacked him. How could you say such a thing? Apologize now. She turned to me. Sorry, Evan, my kid was wrong. He deserves a scolding. It's fine now. John glanced at Ken. Sorry, Ken. I shouldn't have said you don't have a dad. After that, things were easier to handle. John's mom apologized to Emily, who had no complaints. She then took her son and left first. It was well past dismissal time. In the office, it was just me, Emily, and Ken. After a brief explanation, she looked at me, not leaving right away. The old clock on the wall echoed steadily. Time ticked away. I had to say goodbye to Ken and left first, running into my blind date outside. Upon seeing me, she quickly caught up. Emily followed behind with Ken. Beside me, the blind date excitedly invited me to check out her new house. She kept saying, my family bought the house outright. All you need to do is cover the renovation, and you have a place to live. Isn't that great? If you bring out another car from your place, we'll have a house and a car. Sure, the house is fully paid by her family and has nothing to do with me. Yet, I still need to fork out money to renovate it and buy a car. The whole thing is a joke to me. Out of courtesy, since we're both colleagues, I didn't say anything, but I decided to avoid her for a while. Unexpectedly, I heard a clear, sarcastic laugh behind me. The girl I was supposed to be dating turned red, looked at Emily's stern and unfazed face, and swallowed her words. She just said to me, Evan, think it over. I'll be waiting for your answer. Before I could respond, she left quickly. I frowned, heading to the parking lot alone. I needed to make things clear next time. Honestly, I had zero feelings for her. Just before getting into my car, Emily suddenly grabbed my hand. I looked up, surprised. She seemed to realize something and let go. Evan, I need to talk to you about Ken. If you have time, can we chat? It's about her condition. I thought it over, then drove with Emily to a nearby cafe. She crossed her long legs, her expression unchanged, probably thinking about Ken playing with the toys in the kids' area nearby. Ken has autism. Evan, you know that, right? I nodded. Her dad passed away when she was born. The doctor says her autism might be related to this. She craves a father's love. I was confused about why she was telling me this. I just followed along. Well, maybe find her a father figure? Emily let out a soft laugh. Of course. Isn't that what I'm discussing with Evan? Seeing my puzzled look, she leaned closer. Evan, I need a husband. Would you like to give it a try? I turned my head slightly, about to refuse instinctively, but then my mom called. Evan, didn't I tell you to communicate with the girl? Why did her dad say in a weird tone you weren't interested in her? What's going on? Feeling a slight headache, I glanced at Emily, whispering, that's exactly it. My mom started nagging again. With such great options out there and you're still single? Are you really planning to stay alone forever? Fine. If you're not interested, I have other matches lined up for you. Dreading the idea of more dates, I blurted out, Mom, I have a girlfriend now. Stop setting me up. Ignoring Emily's excitement across from me, I hung up. Emily's eyes flickered. Until Ken recovers, I'll pay you $10 million a year for her treatment. So, are you interested? Cut her off, deal. A fake marriage, right? Emily chuckled. It's a sham, yes. But Ken is not clueless. We'll need to make it official, Evan. Still dazed when leaving the marriage bureau, Emily took the certificate, saying she'd show it to Ken later. She also brought me to my house. My mom grilled her about her family history and everything. When it came to Ken, Emily glanced at me. He's my nephew. My sister left him in my care before she passed. My mom, being a longtime teacher, liked Emily even more because of this. Once I couldn't handle the interrogation, I hurried Emily to leave. My mom realized quickly, yes, go on, gather up your things. I watched the door slam shut and my luggage tossed out. Emily's eyes held a hint of amusement. Evan, come home with me. Don't get it twisted. It's to help you bond with Ken, she added. Remembering the black card she handed me after leaving the bureau, I agreed and went to her place, a standalone villa in the city center. Emily rarely stayed there. Except for a housekeeping room on the first floor, only 2 rooms upstairs were maintained. So, she let me have her room and went to sleep with Ken. The bedding carried her cold fragrance, one I had smelled countless times before. It reminded me of when she used to express her love for me. But that was a thing of the past. The next morning, when I went downstairs, Emily and Ken were already at the table. Without lifting her head, Emily conversed with Ken, leaving him particularly happy. Hesitantly, he called me Dad. I was taken aback. Emily set aside her magazine. Don't call people that carelessly, Ken. His joy vanished as he glanced at me, disappointment replaced in his eyes. Looking at Emily now, I felt a flash of anger. Why say one thing and do another? Why get in the way of something she asked for? But we're just in a contract, and he's her kid, not mine. Which means I had no right to complain. On the drive back, I still didn't speak to Emily. She frowned. You're young. I'm not sure if you're cool with her calling you that. I stared out the window, nodding absently. She didn't say anything else, except with a cold laugh. I hope Evan can play the role of Dad well. Once we begin the contract, unless I say otherwise, Evan can't just walk away. I won't let you drop me easily this time. My lips trembled, but I couldn't find any words to say. Later, waiting for Emily with Ken at a snack shop by the school gate, each chewing on a lollipop, Carrie showed up instead. She approached. Evan, why are you still here? Did you think about what I said yesterday? Quickly, I stopped her. Sorry, Carrie. It's just not a good fit for us. And I'm already married. I just wanted to end the conversation with her right away. Didn't expect her to laugh dismissively. Got married so soon? Even if Evan rejects someone, he shouldn't be so half-hearted, right? Evan has good qualities, but so do I. Married? Evan, can you tell me who your wife is? Emily's voice came from behind. It's me. Carrie laughed. Evan, you actually chose someone who's been married before and has a kid. You'll regret it. Emily stepped forward, gave her a cold look, and kicked her in the shin. Get lost. Emily took Ken and me to the amusement park. I played like crazy with Ken there. Emily just stood to the side, occasionally watching us. On the way back, as soon as we got in the car, Ken fell asleep from exhaustion. I lay in the passenger seat, staring at the road ahead, and soon felt sleepy too. Someone brushed my hair off my face. A sigh followed. Evan, in these 7 years, did you ever think of me? I mumbled. Yes. A soft laugh echoed in my ear. In a daze, someone nibbled at my neck. You thought of me? Then why did you break up with me 7 years ago? When I woke up again, Ken and I were lying in a double cabin on a plane. Emily glanced over. There's stuff going on at the company. I need to take you both to Port City. Don't worry, your mom's foot is better. She can go back to teaching, and I've told them about our trip to Port City. I've also handled Ken's transfer paperwork. I thought about it. When we broke up, Emily's company was already pretty big. 7 years later, it's probably even better. Most likely, there's a subsidiary in my hometown. I nodded. Since I'm unemployed now, it doesn't matter where I go. Traveling with Ken and having fun with the money isn't bad either. At least after countless overtime nights for 7 years, I get to relax a bit during this time. When the plane landed, the crowd at the airport exit was large. Emily held Ken's hand with one hand and me with the other. I looked up in surprise. Her ears turned slightly red. Don't get the wrong idea. I'm just scared you'll get lost and there'd be no one to help Ken. I blinked. I remembered when I was in college, I was terrible with directions. On a date, I once got separated from Emily. She went to exit C and I went to exit A. My phone was with her. Emily frantically searched the mall. When she found me, I was buying a cake at a shop. Seeing her, I grinned and asked her to pay since I had no cash. She laughed in frustration. On the way back, she never let go of my hand again. 2 of Emily's assistants, one male and one female, came to pick us up. When they looked at me, they showed only a trace of surprise before turning to introduce themselves. Emily told the male assistant to add me to his contacts. Just in case anything happened and I couldn't reach her, I could contact her assistant. A while later, Ken was attending a private school in Port City. Her condition had significantly improved. I was glad all the time spent taking her out to experience nature and new things paid off. Emily rarely spent time with her. I thought, maybe Ken's autism stemmed from loneliness, craving for company she never got. Ken was well behaved, but with her in school, I had nothing to do. So I thought, after Emily came back from work, I'd knocked on her door with a glass of milk. She opened it. She had just gotten out of the shower, water droplets running down her neck. I swallowed hard, instinctively feeling a bit bashful. I looked up and met her mischievous eyes. I turned my face away quickly. She leaned closer to whisper in my ear, "Evan, satisfied?" I nodded, then shook my head. She chuckled lowly. "Come on in," she said, moving aside for me to enter. I breathed a sigh of relief, placed the milk aside, and sheepishly requested, "While Ken's at school, I'd like to find a job." Thinking of the mesmerizing numbers on the card she gave me, I still felt embarrassed. She nodded. "You don't need to tell me that. Evan, you can do whatever you want." Under the soft lighting, she was too close. Her last sentence had an unexpected hint of suggestiveness. I instinctively wanted to leave but tripped over the couch leg, lunging towards her. Emily instinctively wrapped her arms around my head, pulling me to the floor with her. Her pleasant shower gel scent flooded my senses. Embarrassed, I quickly scrambled up, turning away like a quail with my head down. She wrapped her towel tightly and got up, pinning me against the wall, hands on my neck, kissing me, dominant and intense. My fingers curled tightly, almost digging into my palms. Her hands spread out, interlocking our fingers together. After a long moment, I closed my eyes and gently responded to her kiss. She paused, then kissed me even more passionately. When it was over, my legs felt weak from her kisses. With a soft laugh, Emily led me back to my room. Before leaving, she tilted my head up and gently kissed my forehead. "Evan, good night." Tossing and turning for a long time, I finally fell asleep. "Good night, Emily." I accepted a job offer at a company. The starting date was next week, so I still had some free time. Scrolling through social media while lounging on the couch, I saw a new post from Emily's assistant, Jason. His post's picture was from a meeting with high-priced mineral water in front of everyone. Only in front of him was a cup of bubble tea. Caption: "Thanks for the boss's preference." I lowered my eyes, opened his profile, and checked out all his posts. I noticed he had been posting quite often recently. Went to a dinner party with Emily. And there are selfies sitting inside her extended Rolls-Royce. You always see shots of Emily's hand or leg in them. I felt a bit bitter inside. Realized I still liked her. Thought about what happened last night. Decided to make a move. I made a meal for Emily. We were together before and she never asked me to cook. But in the past 7 years alone, I picked up cooking. Learned to take care of myself. Packed the meal and brought it to her office. Just as I got near her door, I saw inside. Ken was asleep on the couch. Jason was covering him with a blanket. Emily was next to him, saying something. Jason was smiling happily. Looked just like a family of 3. I stood there, frozen, holding the food container, not knowing what I was doing. I was the one who broke up with Emily. She had cried, saying those who break true hearts deserve 1,000 pinpricks. Seeing this hurtful scene, maybe she was right. I had my reasons back then, but still rejected her plea to stay together. And now, what was I doing? Maybe yesterday was just an unexpected, fleeting moment. Threw the container into the trash beside me. Turned away and left. Didn't really know where to go. Just then, a friend called. "Evan, guess where I am? Get ready to buy me dinner." His company transferred him to Port City. I met him at a new bar to celebrate how we'd get to hang out more again. Drank a lot. I laid my head on the table and watched a woman in a dark suit hurry toward us. Told my friend, "Your wife." He looked over, rolled his eyes at me. "It's your wife." I shook my head. "No, it's yours." He said again, "It's Emily, it really is your wife." Remembered the afternoon scene. Shook my head again. "I don't want a twice-married woman. Whoever wants her can have her." Saw her pause, take off her jacket, and drape it over my shoulders. Helped me up, My friend, shaking his head, opened the car door for Emily. She put me in the front seat. He's having a tough time today. Emily paused, nodded. After we returned, she helped me out of the car. I looked at her sharp jawline and face, so close. I protested weakly. I don't want a twice-married woman. She paused. I'm once married. Besides, Evan, you've already turned me down once. Not this time. Ken came out and meekly asked, Dad, if you don't want her, can you want me? Half-dazed, I responded, Yes, Ken, you're my favorite. Emily bit back her emotion. Buy one, get one free. If you want my son, you have to take me too. I mumbled. Forcing something only makes it worse. She shut the door. Whether it's sweet or not, you'll only know by trying it. Then she kissed me. Much later, she kissed my eyelid, laughed softly. Even forced, it ended up sweet. Then tucked me in and left. Next day, came downstairs. Emily was at the table with a finance magazine. Ken was eating breakfast across the table. Saw me and shouted, Dad, I saved you some strawberries. I smiled. Thanks, Ken, you're my favorite. Emily frowned and sent Ken off to school. As I sat, she frowned. I saved you strawberries too. I paused, embarrassed thinking about last night's nonsense, face flushing. But seeing her indifferent face, I nodded. Thanks. She didn't speak, got up to leave. At the doorway, she said, Evan, will you bring me lunch today? I paused, instinctively pulling away, shook my head. No, Emily, we're just employer and employee, right? Once Ken recovers, I plan to leave. Remembering yesterday, I had to say it. Didn't want unilateral feelings in this situation. Had already found a job. Emily stared at me for a long time, then laughed sarcastically and left. A bitter feeling squeezed my heart. Air seemed thin. Turned around, saw the corner of the table. The container I took yesterday was there. Opened it, all the food was gone. Checked Jason's updates. His latest post was from a restaurant check-in. Thanks to the boss for lunch. But if she went out to eat, why was my food gone? Then I got it. Emily recalled what Evan said. Felt a deep pain. Afraid if history would repeat, didn't want to go back. Her good friend invited her out. She went, but Jason was there too. She frowned, wanted to make him leave, but he wasn't with her, couldn't ask him to go. As Jason passed, wine glass tilted slightly. She lazily caught it, saw through the trick, raised her eyes to mock him, suggest not to be sly. She's always been impartial at work. Didn't feel a woman's role limits a man's ability. Gender of an assistant didn't matter. Couldn't keep him around given his intentions. Just as she opened her mouth, Evan's friend burst in. Sneered. Wow, quite a life having one at home and one outside. How come I never realized how emotional Emily was when you were dating Evan? Have you thought about Evan in moments like these? She opened her mouth, wanting to explain. But then she remembered what Evan had said that afternoon. She chuckled to herself. He was the one who didn't want me first. People around noticed the vibe and left the room, leaving only her and Evan's friend. He didn't want you because he was sick. Those words caught Emily off guard. She looked up intensely at him. What did you say? His friend, eyes red, repeated, I said he separated from you because he was sick. The year you graduated, your mother found his health report from his internship checkup and took it to Evan, telling him to leave you. She insulted him on the street, saying he was too weak and begged him to spare you. Emily's eyes turned red, and tears suddenly fell. I didn't know. Those words felt like a dagger stabbed into Emily's heart. She lowered her head, trembling all over. Thank you. It was just a misunderstanding. I'll have him fired. She stood up and left quickly. As the car pulled up downstairs, she looked at the warm lights of the house through the window. She strangely hesitated to go upstairs. She didn't know Evan was sick. Even if she had known, she wouldn't have cared. She recalled a date where they saw a family of 3 ahead. He asked if she liked it. She nodded, holding his hand, saying someday they'd name their child Ken. Evan's hand stiffened slightly but didn't speak. She knew her mother, who grew up in a small county town, favored her brother and spent time in gambling halls. Those vile words must have deeply humiliated 20-something Evan. but he was the one dear to her heart. If they hadn't split up 7 years ago, they might have been married. She sat in the car, closed her eyes, and let her tears fall, finally covering her face as she trembled in pain. It was only after a long while that Evan knocked on the car window. I saw a familiar car from upstairs, but I didn't see you get out of it, Emily, so I came down. He didn't expect to see Emily's tear-stained eyes, and it hurt a bit. What's wrong? Emily opened the car door and hugged him tightly. I apologize on behalf of my mother. I'll handle it. Evan, I don't care. I told you I love kids because I want to have kids with you. If the child isn't yours, they don't mean anything to me. I'm sorry for not knowing about this and for you going through so much. She trembled slightly, giving away her emotional turmoil. I understand. I nodded gently. It's okay, Emily. She put her hands on my shoulders, almost pleadingly. Evan, please don't leave me again. I recalled the day we broke up. When I suggested it, she was holding a small cake she brought for me. Hearing my words, she stood there, stunned for a long time. Her voice quivered, asking, why? I kept a straight face, hiding any longing in my eyes. I frowned. I don't like you anymore. Honestly, I was with you just because you're pretty and rich. I never actually liked you or thought about a future with you. I'm just tired now. I don't know how I managed to say such hurtful things. I only remember Emily looking at me, her eyes red with anger. Why are you tired? Evan, you're lying. I didn't respond, even though my heart wept. She said, Evan, do you want me to show you my heart? You can't break up without a real reason from you, and I won't let go. Evan, why are you suddenly saying this? Is it because of something I did wrong? I can change. Just say it and I'll change. I stood beside the sofa, unable to hold back, tears falling from my eyes. No matter how much she begged, I stayed silent. The quiet stretched on for too long. Finally, she asked, can we avoid breaking up? The apartment was so silent we could hear our breathing. We have to break up. Emily's eyes were bloodshot, staring at me. If you insist on breaking up today, crushing our feelings, let's pretend we never started. I said, fine. Emily nodded. Evan, those who betray true love will swallow 1,000 needles. I hope you grow old alone. I looked at her, then the same to you. Later, we each returned to our rooms. The next day, as I left, I saw Emily's note on the table. Evan, never mind. I don't want you to grow old lonely anymore. When we were young, we were naive and couldn't fight fate. I was too awful, unable to continue with Emily in such a situation. Now, all I feel is regret for the best 7 years lost. We missed our chance. But over time, I learned to handle things. Emily, you and Jason. Before I finished, she quickly interrupted. There's nothing between us. He's just my assistant. We only talked about work. I realized his intentions and had him fired. Evan, I'll only ever love you. I nodded, let's go home. I didn't tell her that I regretted those words that afternoon too. Later, maybe out of fear, Jason sent me a bunch of messages, saying the photos he shared were staged and begging me not to have Emily blacklist him in the industry. He did have his agenda, hoping to push me aside for his gain. But now he realized how formidable Emily was. I initially intended to tell her about my illness tonight, but she already found out. She paused, slightly dazed, as if waiting for something. I smiled, turned back, and kissed her on the lips. Even sensitive Ken seemed to sense something different between Emily and me, but he seemed more at ease with it. Before bed, he hugged my leg and asked, Dad, can you sleep with me tonight? Emily, fresh out of the shower and in silk pajamas, walked out of the room. With a cold smirk, she said, Nope, because my husband has to sleep with me. Ken pouted, looking at me, You're a big liar. You said if Evan became my dad, he could sleep with me just like how John's dad sleeps with him. I blinked. Emily's ears turned slightly red. Ken kept talking, more frustrated. It was rare for him to say so much, and neither Emily nor I interrupted him. But he did seem genuinely upset. From his words, I learned that in those 7 years, Emily often talked about me to Ken. On our blind date, she made sure Ken knew not to let anyone else serve me food. That's why her gaze was so cautious that day. I was shocked by Emily's planning. But in my heart, I felt a bittersweet warmth. In the end, Emily picked Ken up by his shirt collar and tossed him back into her room. When she came back out, her ears were still red as she looked at me. She took my hand and led me into a room. In the simply decorated black room, Emily smiled a bit. "We'll sleep here tonight. I need to grab something." Then she left. After she left, I looked around the room, blushing, and saw our photo on the bedside table, and a bottle of antidepressants. A sharp pain hit my heart. I opened the drawer of her bedside table, finding several identical bottles of pills, and her medical logs, documenting her 7-year battle with depression. From imagining I was beside her to being unable to sleep, even showing signs of self-harm. Turns out, in those 7 years apart, we both had a rough time. When Emily came back with my pillow and a carrot-shaped pillow, she paused slightly. I looked up and asked, "What are these pills?" She looked straight at me, "Just cold medicine." I laughed while tears rolled down. "Liar, they're antidepressants." She said nothing and hugged me. "It's okay now, you're with me." Then she smiled. "How did you know they're antidepressants?" I hugged her waist, staying silent. She held me tighter. "Emily and I are registered, but not yet married. The wedding is planned for next month." The dress and ring were things Emily had prepared long ago. "The wedding details are handled by a professional company, but we'll still have to take the wedding photos ourselves." After the photo shoot, Emily stopped at a supermarket and told me to wait outside while she went in. Waiting outside, I unexpectedly ran into her college roommate and best friend. She approached with no surprise on her face, calling me brother-in-law. Then she asked, "Is Emily inside?" I nodded, then asked, confused, "How did you know we're together?" Her brother raised an eyebrow, opened his phone, and showed it to me. "Brother-in-law, I've got something interesting to show you." "What is it?" I asked, surprised. On the phone was Emily's social media. Her friend scrolled through and narrated. "This is from 7 years ago on graduation night. Emily was ready to propose to you, but we found out from your roommate that you went to North City. So Emily drank alone in a private room all night. This was a while back when she met you again. She started posting like crazy, updating her social media every day. I glanced at it. Most of it was from recent times. Pictures of her cooking, fixing light bulbs, taking care of Ken. And from her work. Not a single post was repetitive. Anyone could tell she was wealthy, beautiful, and an all-around woman. Thinking back to Emily's social media posts from that time, I couldn't help but chuckle. Her friend scrolled to the top. I saw a picture of me asleep on a black leather sofa. I didn't even know when she took it. Her gaze in the photo was full of deep affection. The caption read, "We still have a story." Her friend was known for being talkative and scrolled to the very bottom of Emily's posts. In the 7 years I was gone, she hadn't posted anything on social media. It wasn't long before I found the very first post. A photo of Emily and me on the day we got together. The picture was from before I even met Emily. I stood at the library entrance, in a cream sweater, holding materials in one hand and an umbrella in the other. Emily came out of a convenience store, holding a white plastic bag with a pair of comfy women's slippers inside. Seeing this photo, her expression turned slightly uneasy. I looked up and asked, "When did you take this picture?" She stiffly turned off her friend's phone screen. "The first time I saw you." Her friend smirked mischievously. "Brother-in-law, she liked you from the start. After she found out who you were, she'd often join your classes." I thought about it and understood why I used to run into Emily so often. I thought it was a coincidence. Turns out it was intentional. I remembered when I first liked Emily and pursued her. She seemed aloof, yet her ears were so red they looked like they might bleed. I felt so proud back then, excited by her shyness. Little did I know, the best hunters often appear as prey. If you don't speak, no one will mistake you for a mute. Emily spoke through clenched teeth. Her friend pouted and left with the car keys reluctantly. But before leaving, she said, "Crafty lady." Then quietly added, "Brother-in-law, if you want to know more, check her study drawer." Locking eyes with Emily's cold stare, she ducked her head and drove off quickly. I looked up, grinning at her. Her ears turned red, and she reached out to hold my hand. The evening sun cast its dappled light on us, with people occasionally passing by on red bikes. The convenience store behind us played soft music. Our fingers intertwined. The first thing we did when we got home, Emily held my face and leaned in to kiss my lips. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, fireworks scattered in the sky. It was as intense as her love, blooming like the most brilliant flower. I wrapped my arms around her neck and kissed back. At 3 a.m., Emily was already asleep beside me. I remembered what her friend had told me. Carefully moving Emily's arm from around me, I sneaked into her study and opened a drawer. Inside was a thick stack of plane tickets, all to the same place, from Port City to Kyoto. I thought in those days apart, I never knew she had secretly come to visit me many times. The end. Extra, Emily. The first time I saw Evan was on a late autumn evening, in the pouring rain. After researching some initial project issues with her roommates, she decided to head to the library. Holding an umbrella outside the library, she spotted a handsome guy standing by the entrance. Under the dim light at the door, he stood obediently at the entrance, as if waiting for someone. Maybe sensing her gaze, the guy looked up at her, confused. They made eye contact through the rain. She paused for a moment, looking into those clear eyes, her heart warming, until the guy's friend emerged, squeezing under his umbrella as they left together. It was then that she looked away. Back at the dorm, that silhouette kept flashing in her mind. Just then, her roommate yelled from the computer, "A frog wants to eat swan meat." Looking down, she saw a video of the guy being pursued by a girl clad head to toe in brand logos. She felt an inexplicable tension in her heart. Driven by a strange impulse, she asked, "Did he agree?" Her roommate chuckled. "No way. That girl's a notorious social climber who's wrecked plenty of relationships on campus. Evan would never be with her, he already refused." "No way, Emily, since when do you care about this stuff?" She didn't reply, just felt oddly relieved. Later, she showed up around Evan often. Didn't expect after a few times, he'd purposely choose to sit near her. When she happened to play badminton, he watched from the side, blushing as he handed her water. It seemed he had mustered great courage. Those bright eyes focused only on her. She realized what it meant. Her heart raced wildly. The day Evan proposed they break up, he said something so hurtful. Her lips trembled. Almost tears fell. In the silence, she calmed down and softly asked, "Can we not break up?" Evan didn't answer. Darkness wrapped around her. He said, "We have to break up." "Okay," she said. She couldn't name love as the reason to trap him beside her, though she had thought about it just now. Whether or not Evan still loved her, being by her side was enough. But she gave up. He had the right to choose. In the 3 months after they broke up, she'd still save a seat for him. The night of graduation, she decided to propose to Evan. With everything prepared, she was nervous and sweaty. She thought maybe Evan would say no. But she couldn't predict how they'd meet again after graduation. She thought maybe they'd get back together, get married. But never imagined Evan's roommate would tell her. He flew to North City overnight. Later, she often imagined him still in the empty room, in his arms. After a while, Evan and she argued. He complained she was too bossy. That night, she stared at the sleeping Evan for a long time. When she told her friend took her to see a therapist. She thought, well, that's it. With this illness, she's even less deserving of Evan. She finally couldn't resist her longing, visiting Evan several times. Watched him slowly mature in North City. So handsome, it made her heart flutter. Later she heard Evan's mom got in a car accident. She didn't hesitate to return to her hometown's small city. Saw Evan on a matchmaking date. She was relieved that in 7 years, Evan hadn't fallen for anyone else. But seeing him on a date, she couldn't stop the pang of jealousy and bitterness. She could only pretend to be calm. He'd never know. The moment they reunited, her heart recognized him before she did. Knowing her mom had sought Evan out, tears suddenly fell from her eyes. Didn't know the one she carefully loved had been so humiliated. It was like a knife stabbed deep into her heart. She squatted down, covering her eyes, trembling all over. Felt like she'd never face Evan again in this life. She returned, taking back everything given to her mom over the years. Refused to pay off the hundreds of thousands in gambling debt from yesterday. Her mom yelled at her. "For a guy like that, you treat me this way? I'm your mom." Her fingers trembled, replying in a shaky voice, "Be glad you're my mom, or I don't know what I'd do." After speaking, she sent people to take her mom to her favorite brother's house. Her brother dared not protest, cursing as he took their mom. Back in Port City, staring at the warm light from the glass windows of the big flat, she oddly hesitated to go up, until Evan came down. She hugged him tightly. Thankfully, she and Evan were together again. The regret was they lost 7 years. But thankfully, 7 years later, they were still there for each other. Let love surge. Sink into it for life.